My guest this hour is Nasim Vatani. He is the co-host alongside Sasha White of the Underground podcast. They were guests on the Cut the Bull podcast that I do with Wilfred Riley and Shamika Michelle. And we had a lively discussion about several topics. Nasim brought up the topic of whether capitalism is conservative, and we kind of ran out of time to really flesh that out all the way. So I brought him on here to continue the conversation. Nasim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I came to you because you and your co-host from the Underground podcast came on. I invited you on the Cut the Bull podcast that I have with Will Riley and Shamika Michelle. And I always like to give the guests a chance that we talk about the news of the day, but give you all a chance to bring some topics you want to talk about. And you brought one up. So your topic was it was either capitalism and conservatism, or is capitalism conservative? So can you just explain what your idea of the topic was?
So my idea of the topic is that if you look at capitalism and you look at conservatism, there's a contradiction in terms of what the market wants and what people who identify as conservatives want. Because many people want a more traditional style of life. If you look at the research, majority of working class people want a traditional or a nuclear family. They want one of the partners to make enough money to cover the family's expenses while another partner can stay home and raise the children. It was something like overwhelming, like 60% of Americans wanted this. And if you look at what Mitt Romney and Holly were trying to introduce with the credit for families, there was an interesting article by I want to say it was Columbia, the argument was that giving mothers the ability to make a little bit more money through subsidies for their children would mean that people would work less, which would affect productivity. Which was really weird to hear from a conservative individual, because in order to say that, you're literally saying family comes second to productivity and the market, to which what is conservatism if the market is all that matters to these people? And I know they're more libertarian, and libertarians they play the whole we're moral, but in reality, they don't care one bit about family. They only care about individual freedom and the market, really more market than individual freedom. But I'm going to get the quote on there because it was very interesting to see that because most of the time, the argument of conservatism is to provide stability, have a stable, ordered society, and that is conducive to family. Because the ideal of conservatism for a long time was that the family is the center of the country. And in this case, you're having conservatives now who kind of sound much like the liberals in that, no. The market comes first. Family, they got to learn to adapt. And that kind of makes sense if you're a libertarian. Libertarians pretty much argue that if you don't have money, you shouldn't have kids. So, which is a very odd thing to argue in a conservative circle. If your whole point of a society is to be conducive to families, you're basically saying, well, if the poor are poor, why do they have kids? To which case, that kind of sounds like a eugenics argument in and of itself. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, see, that's why this topic is so interesting. It's layered. It's complex. You have to contextualize it because I see where you're going. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation in this setting and more time to go back and forth. Because one, it's clear from without asking you specifically, it's clear from your reference points and what you're pointing out as important that you, for one, like that 60 some odd % of the people think that the family is important, right?
Yes.
It's not like you're arguing against it. You also are concerned about the fact that while many people want that, the reality of birth rates and marriage percentages are going the opposite way. So you agree that we need to find a way as a society to improve that, because it's better for everybody if we have more families intact.
Yeah.
So the question ends up being the how and the why, which we have some time to talk about. But the first thing that I find interesting about that report is, and you mentioned a little bit of it yourself, the libertarian argument, is that it sounds like the person writing the article was a conservative, but the proposal was also by conservatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like they're like, well, we need to do something about this. So, because I guess you're just asking a question. You're not really saying that all conservatives X, Y, Z. You're just asking the question because many of them are moving away from what they traditionally wanted. And that seems to be the case across the board in political lines, because the culture is changing, without getting to one of my common phrases in a moment. But what it seems to me is that the person writing the article was pushing back against what they wanted to do, saying that, who cares about that? We're focusing on productivity. But wouldn't they be more the libertarian leaning argument than Romney and Howley?
Yeah. Well, I think the issue I have with that is I don't really view libertarians as a form of conservatism. Because it's pretty clear that they're more of like free market fundamentalists than anything else. They think of the free market and that's it. And in many ways, they and liberals are very much the same. They're both they both have the same view on social conservatism. They're not socially conservative at all. They're fine with, if people have the money to pay, you should be able to do whatever you want as long as it's legal. And then you have a question on what is legal and what is not, because, when we were younger, it used to be that pornography was in its sphere and kept there. And like people who would go to like rent porn were given dirty looks as they go into the back room. Now people are talking about it openly. You have an actual movement that is pushing for this stuff. So, I mean, there is a great need for like social conservatism, simply because you have a society that's going into the all permissive culture, which in a society where you have the money to buy, what's up to buy? And, if I can buy it, then it's a moral good, right? Because that's basically the libertarian argument. Anything the market produces, as long as people want it, is good. So that goes into like, well, what we're seeing with transgenderism. I don't know if you saw Tucker Carlson's review of 60 Minutes, but that kind of caught me by surprise. That the whole episode where they go into the rise of affirmation-only care, where you're getting a lot of people who are transitioning. And let's look at this. This is a for-profit industry. This is not a nonprofit. There's a lot of money behind this to make this. And you have psychology, you have all this stuff being affected to where they're just affirming people who have problems not even with that's causing gender dysphoria, and then just saying, hey, put them on the regimen, get them to do surgery, and if they regret, oh well, we don't have any real care about that issue. The industry is looking at profits and it's looking at activism and pushing these values over patient care and patient good. I mean, to have a woman sitting there saying that within 3 months she was pushed into care that caused her to have like double mastectomy, and now there's no recourse or anything for it, and a whole bunch of people got paid, because I mean everything in America is for profit. If it was a national healthcare system, this would be a massive scandal of public expenditure. But it's a for-profit system, and it seems right now you have this mass amount of profit seeking in the medical industry with that one issue. That's terrifying.
Coming up, more with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. And we are discussing his question as to whether capitalism is conservative. And he has some challenges, many of them sensible based on their reaction of Republicans and what some people claim them to be conservatives say and do. And that's kind of what brought up that question. So in this segment, I say, like solving any other problem, you have to go to the root. So I say, let's first define what capitalism is and what it is not. And then we can decide whether it fits into conservatism or not. Here is the next segment of our interview. But it is interesting because you don't hear many people saying that, which is why it's important. As a side note, we talk about people screaming down different ideas. That's why everybody's idea needs to be able to come to the forefront, because you learn. I mean, I've always believed you can learn something from anybody, even if the guy is teaching you what not to do and how not to live, you're still learning. But if we're focusing on I don't like this idea, so I'm not going to listen to it, that becomes a problem. So I say that because you mentioned something about this push to transgenderism and specifically to the surgery and seeing therapists and all that stuff being for profit. So people are making money on it. And I don't really hear people talk about it. So that's why it's good to hear varying ideas. But back to the capitalism push.
Yes.
So to capitalism, in order for us to say, so we talked about how the conservative and libertarian thing is different, some say more nuanced. You say it's pretty stark, but because especially if they're really like free market absolutists, and you should be able to do whatever you want to do. Yeah, that's different. Yeah,
no regulation, nothing,
right.
And we're suffering for that with tech, with the oligarchs.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to that. So let's pace ourselves through.
All right.
So before we get to talk about the varying movements of capitalism and what it does and what it doesn't, and whether in answering your question as to whether it's conservative, we must first define capitalism, because you and I talk about how things change, and I talk about the culture. And that's why I talk about the culture so much, and it's so important, because as the culture shifts, the way our attitudes toward things, like you said, porn earlier, changes, but we also tend to change definitions. And I get in a lot of trouble because I'm kind of a literal person. So I think the words mean what they mean, unless we collectively, 85% or more of us, not 10 people who are loud, get to change the definition. So to me, racism still means what racism means, not what the woke tell me it means.
Exactly.
And same thing. So capitalism. So what is capitalism?
Traditionally, when we're thinking about capitalism, we're thinking about, and we got to look at we're going to go by the layman viewpoint, like what all Americans will agree on. When we look at capitalism, we're thinking about private entrepreneurship, a person's ability to start their own business, okay? And for them to make their own living without having or needing government to, support them. And in that case, that's not a bad idea. You know what I mean? In that case, you can say it is a form of conservatism, because in that way, you're giving power to the individual to be able to feed themselves.
Right. So let's stop there. So we agree on that. So the core, this is where you and I, and when we're on the podcast, got into a more nuanced conversation, because I don't think we disagreed on what the problem is. And I don't even think we disagreed on the points you were making, where I think Will and I were trying to say, I don't want to speak for Will. So what I was trying to say, because I think a couple of times you made some points and I said, that's true. Then I followed it with, but is that conservatism, right?
Yes.
Or is that capitalism, depending on the statement? And that's where things get a little hairy, in the sense that I agree with your definition of capitalism. I think it's a person's ability to own their means of production. But basically, if you want to go towards Rosswell, is it who owns the means of production? Is it the government or is it the individual? And most people, even liberals today, if you take the noise and politics and everything else, just ask a guy on the street, they'll say the latter, right?
Yeah.
They'll say, if I develop something that makes it easier for you to keep your car from getting hit and nobody else thought of it, that I should be able to get rich off of that, right?
Yes.
Or I should own that, the government shouldn't own it. Most people think that. And that's just what capitalism is. Obviously, during agrarian societies, we were trading, goods. Like I bake, but I don't have a blacksmith. So you do this for me and I do that for you. It's, capitalism in its rawest sense. So what I start to glean, I'll let you go on now. I wanted to draw a delineation there because you're going to explain some of your problems with capitalism and whether is conservative or not. I think it's not saying that it's conservative. I think you're saying conservatives are going along with these bad things. Parts of it.
I think that.
And I agree with that. And I'll let you explain that. But where I challenged it, I was like, yeah, but that's not conservatism. That's people's bastardized versions of conservatism or capitalism. That's not capitalism. That's something else. So explain some of the problems you have with capitalism today, air quotes, and then we'll get into whether it's capitalist or not, or whether it's conservative or not.
So I think the problems that we have with capitalism today is we've kind of seen that, we are seeing that there needs to be some form of regulation of the market. Because if we allow for businesses to get large, get powerful and whatnot, what we're seeing is that the owners are not neutral parties. The owners and people who run these corporations are not neutral at all. They'll use their power that they have to further their own political goals and their goals of, like, as we see with the tech companies. The tech companies, if you follow the money, they really do support the Democratic Party over the Republican Party. So if you look at what they're doing on their platforms, they're privileging like certain classes of speech that follows with their thought. So that of woke thought is something that is allowed, something that pushes back too vociferously against that thought can end up getting you banned. And it goes further into that with with the tech issues, where they've even gone to where if you look up the terms of service of Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter, they have a thing about protected classes of people. Meaning what they're doing is they're saying that certain minority groups, they're declaring them protected people. So if anything offends that group of people, or if they think that is so-called violence towards that group, they can just ban you. And that's a really interesting thing because, the term of racism, as you said, has changed. Whereas beforehand, like a white supremacist, for example, was an individual who says, I am a white nationalist and I believe in the superiority of the white people. That was what a white supremacist is. Now, white supremacist just means you're a white person who doesn't want to, quote unquote, check their privilege, or you don't agree that you have privilege. So you are a white supremacist just for saying that. So, things change. And with the market, what we're seeing is it's not a neutral party. And what has been claimed throughout time and space is basically that the customers, the public will check the companies because if they don't like it, they'll leave. Well, who is the competitor with Twitter or Facebook or Reddit? There are, but they're so obscure, so pushed to the margins that you go to those platforms, you speak to nobody. And if you look at Parler, the way they dealt with Parler, you have multiple companies basically just crush Parler and then force Parler to accept their terms. And this is the market basically dictating to the customers what you will and will not consume. And no one has said anything about that. Like, you have some in the Republican Party that have hem and hawed and all that, but rhetoric isn't meeting action. Do you know what I'm saying? Rhetoric, I don't care if they say I want to do something about this, but then you get a C-SPAN committee hearing where no one asks any pivotal questions, and everyone just kind of agrees that there needs to be something done, but we don't know what. And so it's like, all right, so these guys aren't serious in what they're talking about. They're just, making a case to get elected and then going back to offering mass amounts of tax cuts to these businesses.
Coming up, more with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am discussing capitalism and conservatism with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. And in this segment, following up to the previous where we defined what capitalism is, I try to clarify Nasim's position because he is unique in a way. I've always said these people exist and people think I'm crazy, and he happens to be one of those unicorns. He is a social conservative and a fiscal liberal. So I wanted to clarify what his stance on capitalism was.
I don't think you're arguing, let's make this clear, that to solve what problems have come up in recent years in capitalism, we need the government to take over the means of production.
No, I'm not advocating for communism. I think there is an argument for like nationalizing certain industries like defense or providing like farmers, for example. I was learning about the like dairy farmers and whatnot. We have farmers that are basically living in extreme poverty, but they're producing what we need. And unfortunately, the market is requiring them to sell close to like the cost of production.
Well, no, so it's like not even the market; it's the government, because the government gets to decide what you grow and how much you grow. They can make you stop growing. They can make you. Remember, a couple of years ago, there were stories about dairy farmers, since you mentioned them, dumping milk.
Yeah. And
right? We're paying them to dump milk. So it's a combination. As much as you're beating up on the bigger companies, which they deserve, it's a combination of the government, which I want to segue into that a bit.
Yeah.
So the reason I relate that to the capitalism thing is because there are greedy capitalists, right? Oligarchs, as it were. And some people who only care about profit, some people who cheat. It's not even that I'm doing things the right way. I just don't care what happens to other people. I'm following the law and I'm going to make as much money as I can. Some people cheat.
Yeah.
Make that happen. But we also have politicians who put the thumb on the scale. And we also have mafia groups, and we also have gangs, and we also have really bad people. So if we were to turn the control over to government or some other thing, if we have the wrong person in charge of it, aren't we where we are? I don't think the monarchs of old were that benevolent to the poor.
Yeah. I think the problem is that nothing can substitute a politically active populace. And I think one of the big problems we've had for a long time in America is that you had a population that didn't care and doesn't vote. And even if it does vote, it largely votes for just the national. It does not understand, local and local politics and whatnot. Right. And it seems like there's also on the cultural side of America, I mean, there's no doubt in this, there's almost no community left. Because if you look at it, like, yes, you have in rural areas, you can find community, but you're finding more and more people are getting as isolated as possible. And COVID-19 really caused that to, go berserk in that way, the isolation. And that was largely due to, one, lockdowns, and two, people losing their job because of the lockdowns, because, of the virus situation. Mm-hmm. And I think that in order for us to solve any issues, we have to look at it. We have to look at government a certain way. We do have to look at government as a means to regulate because if we don't do anything, we'll still have these oligarchs rise. And we had the issue of monopolies back in the day, and our anti-monopoly law was simply because not to protect consumers, but to protect citizens from a corporation getting so powerful that they can use their power over the means of production of their power of the market to get policies and things that they want at the expense of the people.
Okay,
so
let's talk about that then. Regulation. Because I understand that and I agree with that. And you talk about the past and the monopolies. I study Teddy Roosevelt and the so-called men who built America, Cornelius Bennett and Carnegie and them all. And the things they did was like shocking. Some were illegal, some were borderline legal, but just the way that they thought about ways that they can crush their competition was, pretty interesting. You got to give it to them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, how much regulation do we impose before we cease to be capitalists? Is the next question, right? So let's talk about some of these specifically. So you talk about big tech. How would you regulate big tech?
I think with big tech they've been needing a breakup for a long time. I think that once a company gets so big to where they are dominating their field, I know people will be like, well, you're punishing success. It's like, well, at a certain point, it's no longer about success. The companies aren't beating their opponents; they're buying their opponents out, and they're rapidly expanding because of that.
Nasim may not be wrong in the sense of saying that some of these companies are too big, but his piece about them buying up the competition is not completely fair because some of these people, it's the way the business has shifted and they purposely come up with ideas so they can sell their apps to the big boys and become 20-year-old billionaires. And I just don't know how you would be able to stop that, or if you want to, if they're doing it of their own free will. Coming up, more with Nasim Vatani. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast, and we're talking about capitalism, what's good and bad about it, whether it's conservative and what has changed. And I wanted him to address 3 areas that I think kind of changed capitalism today from what we expected it to be before. That is size, scope, and product, what we define as the product. He talked about size a little bit, and so now we get into globalization.
So we go into globalization. The worst thing that has happened for America is having to have American workers compete with foreign workers for jobs. And that's what we've seen in the marketplace. American companies saying, hey, we can close down this factory and go hire people over in, say, Mexico for $3 an hour. And so on the globalization front, we do need to have either incentives or rules that if companies want to get up and leave, take their business and take their factories and put them in China or put them in some other country, there needs to be either like the Germans have it where they have to give 1 year's notice to the workers and, pay those workers until those workers get up and leave. And many a times, if a company says we're going to leave and they tell those people in a year, this factory is going to go. Now they have to worry that their employees will just go, okay, well, if it's not going to be here in a year, I'm going to get another job, go work for someone else. Mm-hmm. So then they might have to close that factory and they don't have the factory built in overseas. So it makes a cost for that company. I understand the argument of, well, this company, it's private business and all that, but there has to be some form of community on this end, some sort of, you made your money in America, you should be willing to give back to America. Do you know what I'm
So
saying?
would you say it would be better to put those, if you could only do one, a perfect world, this is not a perfect world, so we won't get into that. It would be better to put the fail-safes in for the workers rather than spending that regulation money and time on paying people a certain rate. Like, let's pay everybody $18 an hour when we know the cost of living is not the same everywhere. So even if you think minimum wage should be higher, making it the same everywhere is just silly. So, I mean, there's ways we can fix some of that stuff, but shouldn't the bigger focus is be, shoring up the fact that this stuff is happening so there'll be fewer people unemployed?
Well, I mean, we're going to have problems with this, though, because, I mean, you look at, like, say, dock work and whatnot, warehouse work. Eventually, that stuff's going to be automated. Mm-hmm. So we're going to put the surplus populace who can't get jobs. So we are going to hit that, because I was. But
is it making the minimum wage so high in certain areas going to incentivize the evil corporate baron to automate faster?
I think that automation is going to happen regardless on that. I think they'll make the argument that it is, but I think that in their case, the people who are, well, we got to talk about that also. Why should
we got like 2 minutes left, and then we got to talk about solutions. So go ahead.
I know. So when we're looking at the evil baron and whatnot, businesses are not run like they used to be in like the 1950s and whatnot. Because ever since the rise of consultant firms, they had obliterated middle management, and basically companies, are run by their executives, the consultants, and then the workers. And the money funnels all the way up to those people, and they rely heavily on the consultants. I mean, back in like the 1950s, you're looking at like most of your CEOs didn't even have college degrees. In comes the consultants, and now Ivy League. They fill the entirety of the corporations with Ivy League graduates, which the consultants were Ivy League. I mean, there was a good article about how many of the consultants were ideological. Their whole goal was to go into the companies and make them employ college educated people as their executives, eliminate the middle management, and tell them, hey, by doing this, you can pay yourselves more.
And lastly, we talked about the products. What do you think about the new types of products and how that affects capitalism?
Oh, we have to talk. Oh, that's a good one. Neil Postman and all that went into that. Look at Twitter, Facebook, and whatnot. They don't produce anything. They don't produce nothing. They produce nothing. They allow people to talk. And the good of that is that ideas can exchange. The bad of it is it seems like it's increasing human isolation. Like we have a time with these cell phones where people are more connected than ever, but also people are more lonely than ever. Right. Because they're now no longer hanging out with each other. They're not getting vital human contact. Versus the products we have. Yes, capitalism produces some amazing products. There's, as we see the COVID-19, I mean, United States and the West produced very valid vaccines so far that have, helped society get back on track. When looking at it from another angle, do we really think that it's a good idea to waste resources on fidget spinners? Yeah. But I mean, that's nothing. A whole bunch of sanitation workers produce better services for people, because if you had no sanitation workers, cities would seize up in a heartbeat because of the amount of trash they had. So yeah, I mean, what the market produces and whatnot can be really good, but if we're looking at how we should deal with this, we have to take a real sober look.
So oligarchs, globalization, and products that aren't really products seem to be the key differences that has shifted capitalism. Coming up, our final segment with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. We have reached our final segment with Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. We have been talking about capitalism, and here's the final segment of our interview.
What do we do? What do
we do? I think we need to start thinking about, I think we really need to slow down. And that might be anathema to people in economics. But the pace of life, the pace of technology is changing faster than what human beings can actually adapt to it. And they're not actually understanding what the ramifications are. Because, the ramifications of the internet has been that children now are exposed to things that back in the 90s and 80s, parents would never dream of having that issue. It was a big, like a kid would sneak and go get a Playboy magazine. That's how they would find out what a woman would look like. And now they just go on the internet and just type a search, and there they get the access to a cornucopia of of stuff that we don't want kids to see. Mm-hmm. And so technology has gone beyond what people are capable of adapting to. And I think it's going to get worse if we don't do anything about it, because we've let the market give us whatever it wants. And we've been happy consumers, but I don't think we can be just passive happy consumers. We have to be active, and we have to actually realize that there are costs to all these products. The technology advances, there are costs to it. What might be good on one end might become a national disaster in 20, 30 years. Because, we could really argue on this point right now that social media is a disaster. It has affected our politics. The media has affected our, we didn't get into much of the media nowadays is basically owned by 6 corporations. Right. And so, we're dealing with, and we didn't get into the journalists and how we are hearing only what one side wants to hear. And if one side doesn't like what the other says, they go in and try to get the advertisers to boycott that other side.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there and have you back. But one thing I want to say about the journalists that's interesting, I didn't think about this. See, I'm learning from you. It's taking my mind in different areas. People should make really good wages. There's no issues in that. But when did journalists become celebrities, right? Where the blue checks and people follow them, and celebrities hang out with them, and their friends are famous actors and singers, and they're making, $500,000 a year and getting advertisement and stuff. That's they're supposed to be giving us the non-biased news, and this is what we get. So that's definitely, we could talk about that all day too, but I definitely want to have you back. But I want to end by answering your initial question that brought you to the show.
Yes.
Capitalism, is it conservative? I will say capitalism is conservative. Republicans just aren't.
I think we both agree on that.
He is Nasim Vatani, co-host of the Underground Podcast. Nasim, always fun talking with you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.